Hi, folks. Steve Urban here. Today's episode of the Riderflex podcast is sponsored by Marketing 360. My good friend JB Kellogg and his team do such a fantastic job for us and so many other companies. Marketing 360 is the number one platform for small business, and it's everything you need to grow your business. If you need marketing support, I really encourage you to contact them at marketing360.com/Riderflex, and we'll add that link to the description of this episode for easy reference. On today's episode of the Riderflex podcast, we have David Norman, the founder and CEO at Arryved. That's Arrived with a Y instead of an I, Arryved.com. It's the first flexible, customizable mobile POS designed exclusively for the craft beverage industry. One of my favorite industries. I don't know about you. Loved my conversation with David. I think you will too. David Norman from Arryved on the Riderflex podcast today. David, how you doing?
Very good. Thank you for asking.
Are you in Boulder?
I am in Boulder, and in fact, we've had an unseasonable amount of snow that has cropped in. So it's changed the dynamics of having an office staff and everybody getting in for the better part of a couple of weeks. This is kind of the first day that we've all been together for a while. So yeah,
it has been a little crazy with the weather, right? I mean, wow, a little bit snowy, but that's okay. I'll take all the moisture now. That way hopefully we won't have a dry summer.
Absolutely.
Are you from Colorado originally?
No, I'm not. Was born and raised in Illinois, and then my parents moved to Arizona and was there for the better part of my 20s until finally the opportunities presented itself and moved to Colorado, and now I probably wouldn't live anywhere else.
Isn't that the truth? This is a wonderful place to live, isn't it?
Oh, it's absolutely fantastic.
It's just great. I've lived all around, and this is it for me. So you went to did you finish high school in Arizona then?
I did.
Whereabouts? Scottsdale
No, East Valley, Mesa.
Okay. And that's why you went to Arizona State.
That is why I went to Arizona State. It's kind of a little bit different these days because now I have two daughters, and they're looking at different university options. Both my wife and I went to Arizona State, and we didn't have any concept of going anywhere else. You didn't go visit other campuses, at least not from what we saw in Arizona. So we just kind of both went to Arizona State because that was the natural next step. If it wasn't there, it would have been U of A or NAU.
Gotcha. Okay. What year did you meet her?
Oh boy, I should know this off the top of my head. We should have actually met in high school, but we didn't. We ran with kind of the same group of friends.
Okay.
She went to Chandler High, I went to Mesa High.
Okay.
And we really didn't meet until she marched in front of me at ASU.
Oh, that's
quite
right.
unfortunate for her.
That's right. You were in the marching band, right?
Yes, I was.
I see, and she was too.
She was too. She played tenor sax, I played trumpet, and she marched right in front of me.
I'm having this visual. You're playing trumpet, and you're kind of like this. You're like, wait a minute, who's that? I need to.
Well, I had to follow her, so there was probably a lot to do with that.
Okay. That's awesome. Okay, so both of you guys were into music. You were both in the marching band. Okay, cool. Did you graduate high school the same year?
Yes, we did.
Wow.
It really looks odd when we go through TSA. Her birthday is one day after mine. I am March 6th. She is March 7th. Wow. Makes it really easy to always remember birthdays. We just celebrate hers.
Gotcha. Okay. And two daughters, you said?
Two daughters.
Awesome. And how old are they?
I have a senior in high school that just got accepted into Reed.
Cool.
And I have a sophomore who is making her way through high school now.
Awesome. Congratulations. All right. Awesome. So your parents, are they still there, Arizona?
Yes, they are.
Right. All right. What'd they do?
My father was a field manager for what used to be called Hallpack, but now is Komatsu Dresser, the primary competitor for Caterpillar. He spent an awful lot of time traveling the world, but that was before I came along, and I didn't get to travel the world until I joined my prior company.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, were you always were you tinkering with computers and stuff when you were in high school? I mean, did you know you were going to be a computer science major? Like, tell us how that came about.
Yeah, that was not really going to be the case. Had I always tinkered with computers? Yes, I did.
Okay.
But I had my desire to go to the Air Force Academy. I wanted to go be a fighter pilot and find my way into NASA, and did not end up doing that. I got 2 scholarships. And in fact, when I took the ROTC, the Air Force said, well, we'd love you to come, but you need to do computers. And I said, screw that. I'm not doing computers. I want to go fly planes. Like, no, that's not going to happen for you.
That's not
And
going to
then I
happen.
got a full ride to ASU from the Air Force, but that was also in computers. And I said, no, I'm not doing computers. And when I realized I wasn't going to be going into the Air Force, I did physics and astronomy instead. I wasn't until my second year in physics and astronomy, I was at Lowell Observatory. I had tremendous amount of luck in my career. I was up there on the NASA grant, being able to do observational astronomy. And the person who was actually in charge of the systems pulls me aside and goes, you really should do computers. And I thought, wow, I really suck at physics. He went, no. As he explained to me, he was on his 3rd postdoc at that point and said, if you want to be like me and be jumping postdoc to postdoc, because it's not as if these positions are really sticking around. As soon as the professor retires, the job is going away. You really should diversify your skill set just in case. I went, okay. Well, at that point in time, I decided to double major. And then the ASU physics and astronomy department kicked me out because apparently I wasn't going to be fully committed to that. And so I went full CS at that point, and that's when I just knew that this was the career I was going to be in.
Gotcha. Okay, very good. And then you had a great career, by the way. I mean, really nice. So you worked a couple places, and then I think spent almost 5 years at Wells Fargo, and then 9 years at Google?
Yeah, it was just one of those things where the convergence of factors. I was working for Wells Fargo in Arizona, and Google was looking to open up one of their first remote offices. Decided I had a friend who was working with me at Wells. He went to go interview with LucasArts to go work on the gaming platform, and had made his way mostly through the process. And it really kind of opened up not just his horizon, but mine too. And it's like, we don't have to stay at Wells. We could probably go do something really cool. So Google had posted that they were going to be interviewing for Phoenix. I was engineer hire number 1.
Are you
for that
serious?
office? Yeah.
Oh, for that? Wow.
And saw that through until Google decided that they were going to shut down the Phoenix office. Therefore, the opportunity to come to Boulder. But there was a lot that went into it that, just convergence of factors, just right place, right time.
Do you remember how many in 2005, how many employees did Google have then?
Full-time employees, we were still under 1,500, I do believe, because Google was still in 3 buildings, not the 4 that are on the old SGI campus. They had started building out the last of the offices that were there just at that point. And then the rapid expansion happened. I was not there at IPO.
You were okay. All right. I was going to ask you that. But when you started with them, did you have any idea at that point they were going to, take over the world? I mean,
there was strong inklings in regards to that. But I think the main thing I did not appreciate until I finally went out on my own was really the true startup culture that still existed. Mm-hmm. I mean, here I was in my 30s, but I hadn't really done an awful lot in technology from the perspective of what they were entrusting me to. I was able to build out a team in Phoenix. It was one of 3 different teams that Google entrusted me to be able to do. And it really was do what you feel is best and do what you feel is right. And so it was really empowering to have those elements. And those are the parts I did not anticipate ever having happened at that point. And it's one of those things that I really carried with me into this venture as well.
So 2014 comes along, and tell us, why did you leave there? And I think you had, before you started Arryved, correct me if I'm wrong, but you had another little adventure startup called Red Dog Networks. Is that right? Just walk us through that transition when you left Google, why you left, and how you did your first startup, if you don't mind.
I think what happened for a lot of us that had been there especially since 2005 and before, when you start to lose that entrepreneurial spirit and you stop launching products. When you're an engineer at heart, you want to have your stuff in people's hands. And
I see.
It's hard when you're told no by senior management on various different occasions. You sit in the meetings and they just go, yeah, we're just going to pull the plug on that project, even though in your soul you know that if we just would have launched it, it would have been fantastic. I've been in payments actually the vast majority of my career, and some of the things that we came up with were really revolutionary. And I'm just now watching today, as 5 years removed from Google, watching these things start to take place. Like, well, we had this. We would have gotten it out.
Right.
So it really drove me to that point of deciding that it was time to get out. And so Red Dog was an element. I was not the CEO for it. We were basically recreating some of the tech that was acquired by Google but shelved. Patents had lapsed on it. It was a really great concept built on the original Zave Networks idea of being able to autoplay offers at retailers, because this is all about closing the loop.
Okay.
It's the holy grail. Credit card companies can only tell you how much you spent. They can't tell you what you spent your money on. And retailers want that information, and the manufacturers want that information. So you can tie this all back together.
I see.
So we were looking at being able to rebuild it, but businesses fail 90% of the time because of people. And so that one is definitely one of those cases.
Did you some lessons learned there? Did you surround yourself?
Huge amounts of lessons learned.
I don't know how much you want to share, but can you give some advice there to selecting early co-founders, selecting early team members? Is that what went wrong there?
Yeah, there were some definite lessons in regards to alignment, and alignment also needs to be sure that your core values are going to be aligned too. I've always been one, and this also stems from the Google days as well, not going to be the smartest person in the room. And so a lot of times we have to walk in and check our ego at the door if we're really going to build a great product.
Right.
Everything has to be out in the open. You got to be willing to be able to do that. And when you have one person out of your core team that doesn't align that way, that makes it very difficult for you to succeed, because you're not going to always be open to making sure that we're analyzing and making ourselves better perpetually. But the other side of it is you need to check your ego, because other people have to have wins too.
Right. I totally agree. And so do you think Red Dog would have made it long term if the team had been more solid, because the product and the idea was good?
I think that there were components there. I think the other part that was really difficult when you're building a company to be sold is vastly different than building a company to last. When you're building a company to be sold, you really have short-term visions of riches and trying to get things done and trying to court the right people, as opposed to just building your business for the customers and listening to your customers. And so there's also a kind of a lesson to be learned early on, is to figure out what you're in it for. If you don't understand what you're in it for, then you're going to have a big struggle going through it.
Sounds like you made a quick decision to exit, though. You didn't stay long, and you ended up starting Arryved. But before we go there, can I just go back just for a second? When you left Google, you're married at the time, you had kids at the time. I mean, did you just what you just came home one day and you told your wife, you're like, hey, by the way, I'm going to quit my job, my safe job at Google, and I'm going to do this startup thing? I mean, I'm just curious as to how that went.
Yeah, that doesn't come without its own struggle. But so my wife and I have been married over 20 years now. We know each other fairly well, and she knows that I'm a person that's pretty driven by success, not necessarily by money.
Okay.
And I don't measure success through monetary value. That's what we build, what we see out in the workplace, what I can actually tangibly look at and say, I built that. Yeah. That drives me far more. And she knew that I was really reaching a point of absolute frustration, saturation.
Okay.
And so when it starts to affect everything else, she went, yeah, this is about time. We'll make it work. We'll figure it out. But the other side of it too, and she's always known this too, when you're a software engineer, if things go horribly wrong, you're still employable other places. And when you don't burn bridges,
right?
It'd be a little harder today, I'm sure. But there was always this backdrop that I could go back to Google if I needed to, or I could be employed anywhere else, because I am still a software engineer. So it wasn't that same level of risk. Like, we're going to toss all of our money into it and we're just going to hope that everything works out. At that point, still being at 40, I could course correct if I really made a large mistake. And I say that pretty flippantly. Once you have employees, once you have investors, once you have customers, you can't say that same thing. But in the early days, when you're only sitting there and you're like, we don't have our first customer, you can absolutely say those types of things. Once you have other people's livelihoods that's tied to it, you have to take those things off the table.
It's true. It's so true. And by the way, great tip for the listeners. And I think even if you're not a software engineer, which is one of the most employable positions on the planet, but even if you're not that, I mean, the reality is you can just go back to work, right? It's not like life's over, right? If the startup doesn't make it, and to your point, a lot of startups don't make it, the majority don't make it, you can go back to work, whether you're an electrician or whatever. I mean, you can just go get another job. It will probably be okay. It's not like meteors are going to hit the earth if it doesn't make it.
Well, and there's one big key element to that, which is it's liberating so that you take some very good calculated risk. And that's probably the biggest thing to always have in your mind is that if you always have this backdrop, you know that you can go be employed somewhere else, then go swing for the fences. This element of, and this isn't to take unnecessary risk, but you should be able to evaluate based off of it and up your risk tolerance just a little bit more to be able to do a little bit more because of that.
I totally agree. So when you started Arryved, was that just you or did you have a co-founder?
I do have a co-founder. He's
Okay.
been with me on two different iterations now. He was on my team when we were at Google on payments. He was with me at Red Dog. And then we decided that this was just a wild and crazy enough idea we could go ahead and do it.
Is he the CTO that I saw in the YouTube video?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, very good. So
Dr. Tom.
So you were at Red Dog for a short time, and you're like, "Hey, man, come on, let's."
We all had the same opinion at that point. So, but it's good to go through those things.
Okay, and did you and him bootstrap it yourselves at first? Okay, so you just bootstrapped this thing. You were okay, very good. You didn't have to take on any cash right away.
Well, there's an interesting story here, and you've interviewed other people in Boulder, so you know how a Foundry Group works.
Yes.
I've known those guys for a while before that. In fact, I knew them before I even knew that they were VCs. I was at Google and had met them and had no idea what their day jobs were.
Great connections to have, by the way.
Well, it happened to be that way, but it wasn't just enough to be able to just have that connection. We needed to be able to prove something. So I was sitting with Jason Mendelson, and we were talking about if you were to really create a true beer app, because we have an affinity we share in regards to that, not just him, but also Ryan McIntyre as well, in regards to beer and how we like to see that be social and how we end up sharing those types of things. And there's certain elements that our competitors have gotten right, but some things that they've really gotten wrong. And it's like, well, let me give you the scenario. You used to travel to New York all the time. And if I go to New York on a happenstance trip, I want to go to the place that you go to and know what you drank when you went there because I trust your judgment. I went, well, that's something we could probably build out if we can figure out a social graph for that. So we kicked around this idea because I also had this competing idea, which was order at the table, being able to streamline that process, but not to do it the way everybody else is doing it because it tends to become a bottleneck for the runners. And so Avery had just opened the Temple of Beer, or as how we call it. It's a beautiful facility. But some of the regulars that were there on opening day were frustrated because the system, and there was typical opening day blues, but the beer was still fantastic because some of the regulars were sitting there going, well, if they can't figure this out, I'm not going to be here. And so naturally we were sitting around going, well, if we could figure out a technology solution to some of this, maybe there's something that we can do. So we kind of bonded both ideas, and Jason went, well, why don't you kick around some ideas before you decide that you're going to head back to Google, because that's basically what I was looking at that point.
I see. Okay, great. So you guys are having beers, coming up with this new company, while at the same time you're thinking, I might have to go back to work for Google.
There was that element.
Okay.
Yes. And so as we were kind of pondering a lot of these different things, we went, okay, so we've got a little bit of time. Let's go ahead and see if we can throw together a prototype. Now, I think the part that knocked their socks off was the fact that we went from concept to prototype in 2 weeks.
Wow.
You can do, and it was fully functional prototype as well, not just with having an element that was on a consumer app phone side. So we built it in Android, but we also had built a companion app that went to the merchant. Went and showed it, and it wasn't. Jason kind of removed himself from the mix, as well as Ryan, because we had a personal relationship,
I see.
and they did the right thing, which was introduce somebody else to see if there's something viable here.
Yep. Great.
And so we had to prove this out, but the part that really knocked their socks off is the fact that we could build this entire prototype in 2 weeks. And they went, okay, well, let's see if we can do an angel round. We'll see if we can put something together. You're going to have to go do some work. We're going to seed it, but you're going to have to go try to pitch some more people on it.
Okay.
We didn't get a great amount of money, so it wasn't that tremendous of a success. But Tom and I had enough put aside that we were able to bring on 2 employees to help kind of do some product management, have 1 more engineer, and really bootstrap this, in combination with waiting till the angel money would come in about 6 months after the initial concept.
Okay. It wasn't like you got a check on day 1 for the angel.
Oh, no. We still, they said, we still had to work for it. There was no, gee, we're just because we know each other, we're going to do it. We had to prove ourselves, which I appreciate as well, because we probably wouldn't have survived as a business if it would have just been built off of this element of, well, we know each other, let's go ahead and give some money.
Now, this is your second, right? After Red Dog, is your wife looking at you like, okay, how much money are we going to put into this one? Because I'm guessing you guys are you're having these conversations where you're like,
She had a timeline. And if I did not meet the timeline, that there was going to be reasonable elements to be able to pull the plug.
Okay.
But me being the type of personality that I am, I don't handle failure very well. So I'm definitely going to push and strive and scrap and claw to be sure that we got to the other side. But now we had investors, and I didn't want to let them down either.
Right.
So
now you have investors, and you hired 2 employees right away, right? So now
correct.
You got their families depending on you too.
Yep. Everything changes at that point. So there was failure is not an option at that point, and that's probably the next big lesson to do. If you're sitting there in early startup land, you know that you're going to have some tough times. You need to know what your tolerance is to be able to work through those. And this isn't just, I'm going to sling code for 18 hours a day. There's all sorts of different pieces, especially when you're starting out and you have to do sales and you're going to have to find the right pitch. I mean, you're playing the role. You usually have a designer, a hacker, and a hustler. And I was trying to do all 3 at the same time. It's also a really bad idea. Hopefully you can find people to offset that, but somehow we weathered that storm of idiocy on my own part.
Have you closed the Series A since you got the first seed round? I can't remember.
We did. We closed our Series A in April of last year. We're still executing against that.
Congratulations, by the way.
Well, thank you very much.
How many pitches did you have to do to get that? You remember?
Actually, well, it was all to Foundry at that point. They have since the original core 4 of Seth, Brad, Jason, and Ryan, they have brought on Lyndall and Chris Moody. And we really had to sell them on it, which is good too. I mean, that keeps us all honest at that point.
Right.
And they all signed off on it. And so we were able to go through and do that. So I was very fortunate in our A round, but that's because we had already been in their portfolio and they saw our tremendous growth and all of our tremendous potential. And since they can go locally in Boulder and show it off, not just to for people internal there, but any of the LPs that come in as well, they can take them to Avery and see what the Arryved experience really looks like, which is the upper echelon of service. Essentially, somebody's at table side and the beers are dropping before they even leave the table. And that level of wow factor alone helps to carry us through.
Wow. You don't meet too many guys like you that were, developers at Google that can just naturally pitch and sell.
Oh, right. It's not natural.
Well, but you've done it a few times now. So, I mean, now you can just walk into a social gathering and boom, you can talk about Arryved just right off the top of your head. No problem. You're getting better at it all the time.
I think I'm getting better at the 30-second elevator pitch. Before, it probably took me 5 minutes to get through it, but that's because I have a logical regression of all the things I should talk about. It's like, no, just give me the high level. I don't want to hear about the other crap.
Not to put you on the spot, but can you give us a high level real quick for the listeners that are, they're listening to our conversation and they're like, well, this is cool, but I have no idea what Arryved is. Why don't you give them the pitch real quick?
Well, it is very basic level. It is a mobile-based point of sale that enables anybody to be able to order from any server inside of an establishment and to be able to move freely inside of the establishment. Think about it like an adult Disneyland for craft breweries.
Okay.
Where typically the model has always been, I have to engage with one server at one table, but that's not how craft works. Craft flexes. It might be 2 of you at the very beginning, and then you have 5 people join you, and then you're 2 people afterwards. How do you deal with that dynamic? How do you deal with the fact that your party is ever changing, and that you started out on the patio, and now you're in the tap room, and now you're at the restaurant, now you're on the mezzanine, and everything moved with you, and it's freely moving with you.
Ah, I see. I see. Okay. So, and it's not for the consumer, right? It's just for the waiter or the waitress, the employees. Is that correct?
Well, where we started was the consumer-based product. We went to the point of sale because we were solving a chicken and egg problem, because 4 years ago, point of sale companies wouldn't open their APIs or talk to anybody. So we went, okay, fine, we'll build our point of sale. And now we're finally coming back to the consumer side. We're actually launching it ahead of CBC. We've got it out in the field at a couple of alpha sites, and we're getting back to the consumer experience. But what we really look at this at, our job is to create better connectivity between craft merchants and craft users.
I see.
And it's on all sorts of levels: loyalty, payment, social. Everything is on the table for us to look at.
So there weren't any other POS companies, all these giant old school, been around forever POS companies. Nobody had built anything like this for craft breweries.
Not for craft specifically.
Okay.
When we started, we were the only one. Everybody was trying to shoehorn their product into it. So we also got the benefit of being able to start from the ground up, so that we could track every fluid ounce. So we can tell a merchant how the pull of their tap handles are actually performing, what people are drinking, what they're buzzing about, all of the different pieces that go into it, because those don't really exist. Everybody else builds a platform just to handle order and payment, and they forget that you're actually the central hub to all of these establishments.
I love that. I mean, I'm guessing some of the guys at Foundry said, hey, can we expand this beyond beer? I mean, right? Like, I mean, this could go everywhere, couldn't it?
It could. We're still staying very focused, because the fact that craft in itself is well over 10,000 establishments in the US. We're sitting at roughly about 450 of them. We would like to be able to get to 10% by the end of the year. So we still have a lot of room to grow. And that's not just here. Craft is becoming big business all around the world. So we have 2 choices to make. We could either decide that we're going to stay very hyper verticalized, or we can decide that we're going to expand out to other markets. Those are definitely things in year 4 that are on the table for us to really consider as we grow up.
I know how those investor guys work. That one of their first questions was probably like, all right, well, how many craft breweries are there in the United States? Blah, 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 blah. They're doing all the math right away.
Absolutely.
Okay. I was wondering if it was a big enough market, but obviously it is. And, you still got a long way to grow just right there before you do anything else. Plus you're entering the consumer side now too. So that's great. I mean, very cool. I'm a craft beer guy. I mean, it must be awesome when you're pitching, I don't know, vendors, partners, investors, everybody else. You're like, let's meet at the brewery. I mean, we have to be there so we can see our product in action. Come on, let's have a couple of beers. It makes it easier to close deals.
It has been very good for not just in regards to the investors, but also potential partners and strategic partners for our business. It's pretty easy to be able to get people geeked out at saying, hey, well, why don't we go to one of our client sites? Like, oh yeah, absolutely.
Yes. I mean, absolutely. That's very good. Do you remember, okay, after you built it, how did it feel when you who'd you close your first deal with?
It was Avery.
It was Avery. Okay.
Technically, we had 2 at the same weekend, because we also opened Rayback when they were first opening up their first foray and doing the food truck, food court type of thing. They were supposed to launch a few months afterwards, and then they got occupancy, and then it was game on the first weekend. And that was highly stressful, not just for them, but also for the team here as well, because we were just launching our product and trying to do 2 sites at the same time. So we bit off a little bit more than we could chew.
Is it a monthly fee, or how do they pay?
So we act as the payment processor. Okay. We knew this from even back at our time at Google. Making money off of transactions and doing it as small chunks at a time is a very profitable business when you get it to scale. And scale definitely being lots of people. The other big piece of it, and this is the one I'm more emphatic about, which is also very similar to our old school beliefs. The data is yours. If you're unhappy, take it when you want to. And locking you into a monthly contract or locking you into a 3-year contract doesn't really help anybody. If you're really upset, we don't want you to stay around either. And I think by having this mentality, and also it forces us to up our service game because it really makes us have to retain every person that's out there.
Yes, yes.
It's netted into a result of, in 4 years, we've lost 9 customers, 5 due to the fact that they've closed, not because of the fact that they left our system.
Yeah.
So
Well,
by issuing that challenge to ourselves, we're always trying to make sure that we're being not just better from everybody else from the perspective of providing better service, but also making sure that we're always innovating as well.
I love that. How many customers now?
450.
Wow. Do you remember what it felt like that first Monday, or I guess the first Friday, when those first 2 customers, and all of a sudden like revenue started hitting the checking account? You're like, oh, people are actually paying us. We got something here. I mean, that had to feel good.
There is always that element of it. And I'm so super appreciative for our customer base. It is, craft is unlike anything else of any other industry. And having been in fintech for a while and working at a highly competitive tech company, you're talking about a group of individuals that believe in high tide rises all ships. They will share recipes. They will share hop strains. They will share yeast strains. They will share all sorts of things that are fantastic because they want craft to thrive.
Yep.
I can't name another industry that ever looks anywhere remotely like that.
That's a great point. Very good. Very good. Okay. Let me ask you this. So you've been in business how long now? 4 years? How long?
A little over 4 years.
Okay. Were you cash flow positive in the first year?
No.
No. How? Okay. But that was also a major milestone, right? When you stopped burning cash. I'm assuming you're not burning cash anymore.
Oh, we're burning cash.
Oh, you are still? Oh, okay. Is that because you're just pouring it all into payroll and technology, or because of like the consumer rollout, or?
Part of it is to force ourselves to ensure that we're innovating, but a lot of it was early spend and anticipation of growth.
I see.
And being, again, calculated risk, all signs pointed to that after 3 years. I mean, every year we've been doing 2.5 times what we did the prior year, and we're on track to do that again this year. So we got out ahead of it. We made sure we got our support staff in place and our launch team in place so that we are well staffed ahead of the growth. And so far in 2020, all signs are pointing in the right direction, that we made the right decisions.
What would you like to share with the listeners with regards to stress of being a founder and a CEO that has taken money from other people? You got the stress of being a CEO, the stress of the investors, the stress of the employees, the stress of knowing that, you got this mark that you're trying to get to make cash. I mean, just the stress of all of it, the stress of the wife looking at you like, hey, this better work. I know that it can be stressful because I've lived it running Riderflex and lived it as a CEO and COO for other companies, but it is different when you're an owner and a founder. What can you share with people that are feeling that, I mean, really super, super stressed out and it's really affecting them emotionally? What would you say to those folks?
So there's a couple of different tiers, since you kind of put a lot of different pieces in this. The first big element that I would probably say for most owners as you're going into this is that you think that you're the one person that's going to solve all of the problems. And if you're a one-man shop, then yes, that is absolutely the case. But oftentimes when we start businesses, we've got anywhere between 2 to 4 other people that we enlist. And you need to lean on them pretty heavily. Second thing is, when it goes to that piece, you're not going to be the smartest person in the room. So it's always good to have those additional opinions. I would not have gotten through any of this had I not had those people to bounce all of this off of. I think the bigger portion of it depends on what type of personality that you are. There are those of us who recognize the fact that I'm going to go out, solve and try to solution and solve a problem. I mean, all of them are vastly different scales of different types of problems, but that's what we geek out at the end of the day in regards to. You're going to have lots and lots of lows and just few amounts of highs, but take pride in pulling yourself out of the lows in as small of those victories as those are. I'm of course, not a good person to follow my own advice in regards to that, because I will revel in my lows all of the time, but I will probably do that by myself. Or thankfully, my wife has had to listen to that for a fair amount of times. But there's always a next day, there is always a next solution, and there's always a next thing to get to. And those are the hard parts to kind of keep reminding yourself of.
What was the scariest moment so far, or one of them that you might want to share in particular?
Um, yeah, that's a good one. We had a processing partner in our early days
Okay.
that I'm going to try really hard not to disparage the entire industry, but there are some unfair practices that tend to happen.
Now, this is for the listeners, this is the merchant services or the people that process the credit card payments or the card that run that information through the cards or whatever.
Correct.
Okay.
And there's multiple people that take out money in that entire flow, right?
Yeah.
There's lots of middlemen that take out their pennies. Well, what ended up happening is they hit a charge in one of the statements, and it ended up pulling more money from our merchants than was negotiated. We went back and forth and said this needs to be corrected. They refused because most merchant processors do not ever really want to refund money, and it was a noticeable amount. So we went mea culpa to all of our clients and said, look, we were the ones who chose this processing partner. We want to make this right. So we took it out of our own coffers. It shortened our own runway by doing that. We thought for sure that some of our merchants were going to be highly upset with us and really question our judgment if those are the types of relationships that we have entered into. But I know that I can go to bed at night feeling good about ourselves. And if we failed as a business, we did the right thing by making sure that we made this right for every person that was out there and refunded all of the money that was overcharged.
Gotcha. We'll see. And this is the tip for the listeners. You're going to have problems. You're going to have issues. You're going to have hurdles, curveballs. I mean, it's just part of it. Just be ready, right?
It's always random too. It's never what you think it's going to be. In being a highly analytical individual, you will sit there and just try to figure out every possible angle. And I have walked into client meetings where I thought that I have analyzed every possible thing that they could have said. And usually the meeting went in a completely different direction than I ever anticipated. So sometimes you just got to be fast on your feet.
By the way, were you the one closing the deals as the sales guy early on too?
Yes.
Wow. How about that? Which is
not good for an introvert to try to figure out how to do that.
Hey, you got to give yourself more credit. I've watched you on some of the YouTube videos, these things. I've seen you in action. I wouldn't classify you as that. I mean, hey, remember, I'm a recruiter for a living, so I recruit software engineers and developers, and I know most of their personalities, and it is sometimes like talking to a tree, quite frankly. But yours is definitely a lot. I mean, I would want to hang out with you and have beers at one of your clients. So
we should definitely arrange that. But I actually need to give the kudos. We would not be where we're at had it not been for the tremendous efforts of Nancy Trigg and Alex Osler, because they are really the grounding influence. I can easily get into the weeds because, yes, I will talk technical details and go, they don't want to know that. Just tell them exactly what the core product is. Just don't talk about that other stuff. It's like, yeah, I know. I want to talk about it because I geek out about it. But,
Now this is something I've picked up on your personality, which is probably why people love working for you, and which is probably why you've been successful early on here, is because you immediately took the opportunity to compliment some of your team members, and you talked about your co-founder earlier, and on the YouTube video that you can pull up about Arryved, it was made to where it wasn't just you for 25 minutes and, oh, here's all about me and how I started the company with my co-founder. The video went right into highlighting your employees that's on YouTube that I saw. And I thought immediately to myself, just as an observer, and I'm a pretty curious, observant guy, and I thought, man, this is a sign of their culture. This is a sign of how much people mean to David, or because you wouldn't do that unless your employees meant something to you, and you got them on camera and you got them highlighted. Little stuff like that matters, my friend. And I think that's probably a huge part of why your employees are like, hey, this is pretty cool. I like working here. I want to be on this team.
Well, thank you very much. I think that is one thing that gets overlooked by founders, not just us, but everywhere, is what culture do you want to set from the very beginning?
Right.
I understand more so today than I probably did 4 years ago. What it is that really means to have the values that we want to have. We want to have a highly competitive,
Yeah.
collaborative environment in regards to what we do day in and day out. We want to be able to be as transparent. And there's a lot of companies who pay lip service to it, but don't really understand what that really means. And it goes back to where I kind of led at the very beginning, which is you have to check your ego at the door, and you have to let other people have wins. If you don't end up doing that, then it's a very difficult situation. People want to feel successful. I know I want to feel successful. I know that every person here wants to feel successful at what they do. And you need to be able to take the time to be able to acknowledge those things. And one of the things that we typically often say is we celebrate as a team all of our wins, but we also revel in our failures as a team together, partially because of the fact that we want to make sure we never repeat them as well. And it's a core tenet of all of our company. We're going to make mistakes. Startups are messy. You're going to make mistakes.
Yes.
It's all in how we handle them and how we make sure we don't do them again, and not hide anything, not just from the perspective of each other here, but not from our customers either, because that's the only way you build trust.
Good stuff, David. Really good stuff right there. Excellent. Let me ask you this now: when you're interviewing people, how many employees now?
We're at 41 employees now.
Wow. Wow. Do you just drive home some days and go, wow?
Yes, I do that. There are days, and going back to an earlier statement that was there, in regards to the culture and people, I just want to, when I go to work, I want to enjoy going to work. So I want to surround myself with people that are equally as challenged and want to work as well. Because you're going to spend more time with the people that you work with than probably even your family sadly, at a lot of different points in time. So you want to be collaborative. You want to be working towards a common goal in regards to that. It's just as much for me as for anybody else. I want to enjoy going to work too.
Right. I totally agree. When you're interviewing somebody now, right? Because now you got all these craft beer fans, filling out applications. They all want to work there because they think they can hang out and drink beer all the time. No, I'm just playing. But when you're interviewing somebody, do they, how are you deciding, from a personality, company culture perspective, forget about the skill set for a second. Let's just assume they have the skill set you're looking for that particular position. How are you deciding like this person's going to fit our team?
The collective amount of the team, because I did steal a fair amount of my team from Google as well. We're still indoctrinated into the Google way, but this is the old Google way of how we interviewed people. And there's definitely 4 dimensions. There's natural intelligence, there's cognitive ability of thinking on your feet, communication, and culture. At Google, we called it the Googliness portion. And I refer to it because spending 9 years there, I'm going to probably bleed the colors till the end of days. But we kind of transform that a little bit in regards to what, when we talk about culture fit for us, it's naturally inquisitive. And so we structure our questions in such a way so that we can see, can you take information and extrapolate from incomplete data, but also what is it that you do for self-improvement? Big key of that is if you leave the job and you just go home and vegetate at that point, then there's probably not much that you're going to kind of expand your horizons to ever really do. However, when you leave here, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're learning something new for us, but you should be learning something new. What do you read? Did you try to take on a new recipe that you've never done? Are you trying to pick up a new skill? Those are more indicative of the type of people that are going to probably be more suited also for a startup environment, because you're going to need to learn from other experiences as well. So if you're not in this perpetual mode, it's going to be pretty tough for you, because you don't know what you're doing from a day to day, because it changes. What we did last week isn't the same thing that we're doing this week.
So
we're not an old stodgy company that is stuck in their ways. We're kind of inventing and creating new paths for ourselves every day. So that key component of natural curiosity has to leak through in an interview.
That's good stuff. You're right. For the listeners, if all you've done is work for Fortune 500 companies and you're about to go to work for a startup, it is going to be a shock to your system. I don't care how much you try to prepare for it. It's going to shock you, because every day you're going to go to work and you're going to go, hey, David, what's our process for? And you're going to go, yeah, we're writing that process today.
Thank you for signing up. One of our employees, Billy, is our head of our launch coordination team, does a fantastic job getting our sites up and running. Always sits there and says, as soon as that comes up and I say, that's a great idea, you should do it, he turns and says, you were voluntold.
I love it. Do you have a favorite interview question specifically, by the way, before we leave that topic, and then I'll go ahead towards wrap up, but any like you have a couple of little favorite questions?
Well, so going back to the natural curiosity one, when I usually ask the question, say, look, I would love it if everybody here thinks about Arryved 24/7, but that's not really the case.
Yeah.
But what typically does happen, especially us being an engineering style firm, we're sitting out in any number of places. Pick your favorite brewery,
Yeah.
and you look across and you see a problem to be solved. Now, what do you do? Do you challenge yourself to figure out more about the problem? Did you need to learn something in regards to addressing that problem? What was the last problem you tried to tackle? Because this goes beyond that element of just asking the typical behavioral questions. Tell me the hardest bug you worked on or something like that. This is something that required you to actually put some thought into and went, oh yeah, I did see this. And I went online and I looked at how I might be able to solve this problem. And I found that there was some bits and pieces of information that I could string together. That tells me a whole lot more. That was more revealing in about 1 minute of conversation than I would probably find out by putting you at a whiteboard in regards to, and which I will still do, to
really?
go work on a problem. But I want to know more about your thought process about how you view the world.
Do folks that came from huge companies and have never worked for somebody smaller, does it worry you?
No, because there are some people that go to that because they do a really good job recruiting at colleges. It might be their first job right out of there. And what you're looking for is that person who wants and is driven by finding that little bit more.
Right. Yep. Exactly. Yep. Totally agree. Okay. Very good. You can still hear me, can't you, David?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right. I'm going to head towards wrap up here. Ask you a couple more questions. I know we're almost out of time, and I know you're super busy, so thanks for doing this. 2 more questions. As you look back now, and you probably know these questions I'm about to ask you if you watched any of the other interviews. As you look back on your life and you think about the 21-year-old coming out of Arizona State, if you could call that young man and tell him anything, what would you tell him?
The funny thing would be, I would say it's all right that you got some bad grades, because the fact that you didn't know exactly what you're doing when you were transitioning and doing stuff, but to just know, just be patient. I didn't understand patience back then. And I think that's the same thing to be said for any of us when we were young. There's a certain level and you think you come out with a bunch of wisdom. You don't know it until you finally go out and do it. And I think that's the part that I carry with me now, being a later CEO in my life of a company versus being a person coming right out of college and then thinking that I was going to try to start my own company.
Can you imagine if somebody told you that you would be the CEO of a POS company that serves breweries, craft breweries across the country? If they would have told you that when you were 21, you would have been like, yes, that is a cool job. I want to do that.
Yeah, if somebody would have said that but also when I was 21, our version of craft beer wasn't the same as what we have now.
That's true. That is very true. Right. Very true. Okay. And then how about this question? If you could put your core purpose in life into a sentence, and I didn't let you tie that back to your 2 daughters or your wife, because I'm just going to assume that is your natural core purpose, to take care of them. So if we looked beyond that, and I kind of pushed you to answer beyond family, how would you describe David's core purpose right now?
Right now, I view my purpose as enabling others to succeed.
And that includes investors, employees, and everybody else, right? And your clients.
And customers. Our clients, every portion of our constituency from top to bottom.
It is a special feeling. It really is hard to describe. I always tell people, I just can't describe to you until you become a major equity holder or a founder in a company. Maybe you don't own the whole thing, but if you're a major owner and executive, and you have employees that have helped you build something from the ground up, and they've helped you get to a certain place, and you've met their family members or their kids, and you see them and you look at them in their eyes, and that 12-year-old kid of the employee that works for you is looking up at you like, I'm depending on you to make the right decision, bro. It is a stressful but super special feeling all at the same time, because you've created this entity that is driving revenue and profits, that's helping put food on their table and pay their mortgage and make the car payment. And that is really just a super special feeling. I try to describe it to people that haven't done it, and I think it's hard for them to relate. But when you've built something like that pays bills for families, you're like, it means more to you than the money, right? It's just like, wow, this is cool. So anyway, I don't know if you want to touch on that subject, but I always try to explain to people how that feels. It's really awesome.
I've never, oh boy, it's going to sound really bad. I've never looked at it through that lens. I've more looked at it as I'm helping others to achieve their goal. I've never once thought about the financial element of it. I've always had one piece, and it wasn't just myself. I had a tremendous manager. I reported to Scott Green at Google, who was the site director for Boulder until he retired this year. And when he gave me the opportunity to bring payments here and then build the team that was here, we still had the same exact mantra. We almost sounded identical for a long period of time, which is just do the right thing and everything else figures itself out. And that went for promotions and all the little minutia that we always think about. And so that's probably why, going back to the original conversation about the hardest thing that we had to do and just do the right thing. Yeah, refund the money. And if we end up out of business because of it, then we did the right thing. But just do it, because it takes far too much brain power and brain damage to do the opposite. It's just easier to do that piece. And so if you figure out that portion of the mantra, and everything else works out. And so I tend to look at everything else through that lens too. And I haven't stopped myself to really, until you had brought that all up, in regards to the financial element. I just go, the right thing is help people achieve their goals, and yes, everything else takes care of itself.
Love it. Love it, David. Awesome stuff. Hey, congratulations on everything you guys have done so far. I mean, wow. Well, all the way from 0 to 40 something employees. By the way, the name, I forgot to ask you, my fault. The name and the spelling, because it's pronounced Arryved, right? And the spelling and the name. Can you just quickly touch on that and just tell people, by the way, the URL for the website, and just touch on it? Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, Arryved was originally supposed to be with an I, but we were, especially at that point in time, have $2,000 in the bank to go buy the domain. So we had to be a little bit more clever. The name Arryved because of the fact of what we were looking at doing, which was, if you're at the establishment, people need to be notified that you're there. I'm going to order a beer. We're like, well, it's a double entendre. You've arrived. You know that they've arrived. Your beer has arrived. I mean, there's any number of different plays that we looked at that.
I see.
So we kind of settled in on that. So because the I was taken, we went with a Y. So it's, for us, if you want to find out more about us, www.arryved.com. That is with a Y, not an I. And find out all the great things that we're doing. We have Instagram as well in regards to all of our outreach to breweries. We have fantastic clients. So naturally, we're always promoting on their behalf as well through all of our social media too, because we want to see them succeed just as much as they want to see us succeed too.
Can I be one of your test guys that gets the consumer app first when you roll out the test version or the beta version?
Why don't you come on up to Boulder? We'll go up to Rayback and you can use it there.
Oh yeah, love it. I'm going to hit stop on the recording, but hang on just a second before you hang up. Okay. Thank you so much for being on the Riderflex podcast, David.
Thank you very much, Steve.
The Riderflex podcast features entrepreneurs, business executives, and the stories behind how they got there, as well as daily tips on career advice and job interviews. Our show can be heard just about anywhere these days, but you can visit riderflex.com and click on the podcast page to hear all the previous episodes and learn more about the recruiting and consulting services we provide. Contact us at the email address info@riderflex.com or 888-964-5876. Thanks so much for listening, and if you enjoy our show, please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like the episodes.